The ceramic mug was already on the counter when I came downstairs, steam curling up from the surface in slow, lazy spirals, chamomile and honey. My daughter-in-law had made it for me every single morning for the past 14 months, except my daughter was dead, and the man who made my tea was the one who had stood at her graveside and wept so convincingly that even I had put my arm around him. I didn't drink it that morning. I poured it down the sink the moment I heard his car back out of the driveway. Then I sat at the kitchen table and stared at the drain and thought about my sister. Carol had been gone for 3 years. Breast cancer, fast and merciless, the kind that doesn't negotiate. She was 61 when she died, and I was 62. And I remember thinking that we had always done everything together: school, marriage, motherhood, grief, and now she had gone somewhere I couldn't follow her. Not yet, anyway. I had been angry at her for dying first. Isn't that a terrible thing to admit? I had been furious at my dead sister for leaving me alone in the world. She came back to me on a Tuesday night in late October. I know how that sounds. I was a registered nurse for 37 years. I believe in what can be measured, what can be charted, what can be confirmed with a blood panel or an X-ray. I am not a woman who sees things. I am not a woman who believes in signs, or I wasn't. I'm not sure what I believe anymore, except that my sister saved my life, and that has to mean something. The first dream was gentle. I was in our childhood kitchen in Akron, the one with the yellow curtains our mother had sewn herself, and Carol was standing at the stove the way she always used to stand, one hip cocked, a dish towel thrown over her shoulder. She looked healthy. She looked the way she had looked at 45, before the diagnosis, before the treatments hollowed her out. She turned and looked at me and said, simply, pay attention. I woke up with tears drying on my temples. I lay in the dark of my bedroom, my daughter's childhood bedroom, in the house where my daughter had grown up, the house I'd moved into after Lily died, because I couldn't stand to be alone, and because my granddaughter needed someone, and I told myself it was grief. Just grief. Carol's birthday had been the week before. The mind does strange things with dates and anniversaries. I took a breath and went back to sleep. The second dream came 9 days later. This time we weren't in Akron. We were sitting at the kitchen table in this very house, the one I was sleeping in right now, and Carol was across from me with her hands flat on the table the way she used to do when she was serious about something. The morning light was coming through the window behind her, and I could see every line of her face, every silver hair, and she looked at the mug in front of me, the chamomile tea, steam rising just like every morning, and she pushed it away from me. "Don't drink that," she said. "Why?" I asked her. She opened her mouth to say something else, and I woke up. I sat up in bed and my heart was hammering. The room was dark and quiet. Down the hall, I could hear my granddaughter breathing in her sleep, that soft, steady sound I had come to depend on in the worst months after Lily died. I pressed my hand to my chest and told myself it was a nightmare. I told myself Carol had died of cancer, and her lungs had stopped working, and she was gone, and dreams were just the brain recycling the day's anxieties into uncomfortable cinema. I told myself all of it, but I didn't drink the tea that morning either. I told my son-in-law I wasn't feeling well. He said that was fine, that he'd make a fresh pot when I felt better. And he smiled at me with that handsome, even smile, and I watched him drive away to work, and then I stood in the kitchen for a long time looking at nothing. His name was Brandon. He was 38 years old, which made him 9 years younger than my Lily, who had been 47 when she died. They had been married for 6 years. He was good-looking in a studied way, the kind of man who kept himself very trim and wore his clothes carefully and always seemed to be performing competence rather than simply having it. I had never trusted him entirely, but I had kept that to myself because Lily had loved him, and because my granddaughter Sophie adored him, and because I had told myself that my unease was just a mother's reflex, the territorial suspicion of a woman watching someone else take her daughter's attention. After Lily died a heart attack, they said, sudden and devastating and deeply unusual in a healthy 47-year-old woman with no cardiac history, Brandon had been wonderful. That was the word everyone used. Wonderful. He had handled the funeral arrangements. He had called her friends. He had organized the food that neighbors brought to the door. He had suggested, very gently, 2 months after the burial, that maybe I should move in, for Sophie's sake. So, my granddaughter would have her grandmother close. I had said yes immediately. I would have said yes to anything that kept me near Sophie, who was the only piece of my daughter I had left. 14 months. I had been living in this house for 14 months, and every morning the tea was on the counter when I came downstairs, and I drank it because it seemed kind, because it was a small gesture of care, because I was lonely and grieving, and sometimes a warm mug in the hands is the only comfort available. The third dream came 4 days after the second one. Carol was standing in the doorway of my bedroom. Not the childhood kitchen. Not the table, my actual bedroom. In this house. At night. She was wearing the blue cardigan she'd been buried in because it was her favorite. She walked to my bedside and sat on the edge of the mattress, and the mattress dipped under her weight, and that detail frightened me more than anything else, because dreams don't usually have that kind of specificity, that kind of physical logic. She put her hand over mine. "Dorothy Ann," she said. She only ever used my full name when she was frightened for me. "Listen to me very carefully. Do not drink what he gives you. Not the tea. Not anything he prepares for you. Do you understand me?" "Carol," I said, "you're scaring me." "Good," she said. "You should be scared. Think about Lily. Think about what really happened to Lily." I woke up gasping. The clock read 3:14 inches the morning. My hand was tingling where hers had been. I turned on the lamp and sat up and pressed my back against the headboard, and I thought about my daughter. Lily had been in perfect health. She ran 3 mornings a week. She ate well, she slept well, she had a checkup every year, and every year the doctor told her she was doing great. She had no family history of cardiac disease on my side. Her father had died of a stroke at 78, which was not a warning sign for a 47-year-old woman. There had been no warning, no pain that she mentioned, nothing. She had been found at home, in the afternoon, by Sophie, when my granddaughter came home from school. Sophie had found her mother. My granddaughter had been 6 years old when she found her mother. I sat in the dark and I thought about that, and I thought about what Carol had said, think about what really happened to Lily, and something cold settled into the base of my spine and didn't leave. I didn't sleep again that night. When the sky started to lighten, I got up and made coffee, and I sat at the kitchen table, and I thought very carefully about everything I had pushed away in the blur of grief. The way Brandon had been so calm at the hospital, so steady, so organized. How quickly he had contacted Lily's life insurance company within a week of her death. The way he had redirected conversations about the autopsy, saying it was too painful, saying he didn't want to put the family through an investigation, saying Lily would have wanted them to focus on healing. How I had agreed because I was shattered, and I trusted him. I started paying attention differently after that. I started noticing things I had explained away, how Brandon frequently took phone calls in his car in the driveway, engine running, for 20 or 30 minutes, how he sometimes stayed late at work on the same 2 evenings every week, always Tuesdays and Thursdays, always returning after Sophie was asleep, how he had, in the past 6 months, asked me to sign several documents, updated household paperwork, he said, just administrative things he was sorting out, and I had signed them without reading them carefully, because I trusted him, because I was tired, because he handed me the pen and pointed to the line and said it was nothing important. I found the documents on a Wednesday afternoon. Brandon was at work. Sophie was at school. I went into his home office for the first time since I had moved in. He kept it locked, but I had found the spare key in the kitchen junk drawer months earlier and never thought to use it, and I sat down at his desk. The filing cabinet drawer wasn't locked. I found what I was looking for in the third folder. My name, Dorothy Hargrove. Life insurance policy, issued 16 months ago, 2 months before he had suggested I move in. The death benefit was $980,000. The sole beneficiary was Brandon Kellner. He had taken out a policy on my life before he invited me to live in his house. I held that piece of paper for a long time. I made myself breathe. I am a nurse, and nurses learn early that panic is a luxury you cannot afford when someone's life depends on clear thinking. I set the paper down and I looked through the rest of the folder, and what I found there rearranged everything I thought I knew about the past 2 years. There was a second policy. This one was on Lily, issued 3 years before her death, the same year Carol died, the year I had been so consumed by my sister's illness that I had barely surfaced. The death benefit was $1.4 million. Brandon had collected on it 8 months after Lily died, after the mandatory review period closed. There were bank statements. Account numbers I didn't recognize, not the joint accounts I knew about. Money moving in regular increments, a balance that was shrinking faster than it should have been. And there was a name, recurring in emails he had printed out and filed, a name I didn't recognize, a woman named Gretchen, in messages that were unmistakably intimate, stretching back 2.5 years, before Lily died. I took photographs of everything with my phone. I put every document back exactly as I had found it. I locked the office behind me and went to the kitchen and sat down and let my hands shake for exactly 5 minutes, because I gave myself 5 minutes to fall apart. Then I stopped. I called my son. My son lives in Portland, Oregon, 2,000 miles away, and he is a practical man, an engineer, not prone to sentiment or to drama, and when I told him what I had found, he was quiet for a long moment, and then he said, "Mom, don't eat or drink anything that man gives you. I'm booking a flight." "I don't need you to come yet," I said. "I need you to help me think." "Then think fast," he said, "because I'm booking the flight anyway." We talked for 2 hours. My son is meticulous. He asked questions I hadn't thought to ask and pointed out angles I had missed. At the end of the conversation, he said, "You need more than financial documents. You need something that connects him to how Lily died. And you need something that proves he's doing something to you right now." He was right. That evening, I retrieved the last 4 days' worth of morning tea from where I had been secretly pouring it, not down the drain. I had started saving samples in small glass jars I kept hidden in the back of my closet, because somewhere in the back of my trained mind, I had known, even before I consciously admitted it, that the tea might matter. 4 jars, 4 mornings. I labeled them by date and I wrapped them in a scarf and I put them in the trunk of my car. I called a woman I had worked with for 11 years at Mercy General, a toxicologist who had retired to Scottsdale but who still consulted occasionally. I asked her if she could tell me what she was looking at if I mailed her samples discreetly. She heard something in my voice and she said, "Dot, are you safe right now?" I told her I was and she said she would call me the day she received them. Then I went downstairs and made dinner and helped Sophie with her homework and sat across the table from the man who had killed my daughter and who was slowly killing me, and I smiled and passed the bread and said that yes, the meatloaf was very good. "Thank you for making it." And I watched his face for cracks. He was good. I'll give him that. If I hadn't been looking, I never would have seen it. But I was looking, and I saw the way his eyes moved to my water glass every few minutes. The way he watched me take each sip. There was something underneath the solicitousness, something that was not quite patience, that was more like anticipation. I switched glasses with Sophie when he got up to check the oven. I told myself it was probably fine. I told myself I was being paranoid. And then I told myself that the woman who had said that exact thing about the tea was still alive because she had stopped drinking it. The results from Scottsdale came 12 days later. My former colleague called me from a number I didn't recognize, which told me she understood the gravity of what she was doing. She told me she had found elevated levels of digoxin in 3 of the 4 samples. Digoxin, a cardiac glycoside used to treat heart failure in high doses over time, capable of inducing exactly the kind of cardiac event that had killed my daughter, undetectable, without specific testing. Not screened for in a standard autopsy. I sat in my car in a grocery store parking lot and I let myself cry for 3 minutes. Then I drove home. I called my son from the parking lot before I drove away and I told him what she had found and he said he was boarding a plane in 6 hours. I told him I needed 1 more day. He said 1 more day was all he was giving me, and if I didn't call him by noon tomorrow, he was calling the police himself. I spent that night planning. Here is what I had. Financial records showing he had insured my life before inviting me into his home. Evidence of an affair dating back before Lily's death. Toxicology results showing a cardiac drug in the tea he prepared for me. But I was not a fool. I knew that a defense attorney could pick at each piece individually. The insurance policy could be explained as responsible estate planning. The affair was not a crime. The toxicology results had been obtained by a retired colleague testing samples I had collected myself, not a court-certified lab. A good lawyer could create enough doubt. I needed him to say it. The next morning, my son's flight was arriving at noon. I had 9 hours. I came downstairs earlier than usual. Brandon was already in the kitchen. He turned when he heard me and smiled, and the mug was already on the counter, already steaming. "You're up early," he said. "Couldn't sleep," I said. That part was true. I sat at the table and I looked at the mug and I thought about Lily. I thought about Sophie finding her mother on the kitchen floor. I thought about Carol sitting on the edge of my bed with her hand over mine, the mattress dipping under her weight. I thought about 37 years of nursing, 37 years of watching people fight to stay alive with everything they had, and I thought about how my daughter had not been given a chance to fight. My phone was in my robe pocket. I had started recording before I came downstairs. "Brandon," I said, "can I ask you something?" "Of course." He sat across from me, relaxed, that even smile in place. "The life insurance policy you took out on me," I said. "The one from 16 months ago. I'd like to understand why you didn't tell me about it." The smile stayed on his face for exactly 2 seconds before it changed. It didn't disappear. It became something else. Careful, recalibrating. "Where did you hear about that?" he said. "I found it," I said. "In your office, along with some other things." He looked at the mug in front of me. I had not touched it. Then he looked at me. "Dot," he said. "You're misunderstanding the situation." "Then explain it to me." "It's standard financial planning. When you moved in, I wanted to make sure that if anything happened to you, there was coverage for the household, for Sophie's sake. You took it out before you invited me to move in," I said. A beat. "I was already planning to ask you. And the policy on Lily?" I said. "Was that standard financial planning as well?" The careful expression cracked. "Just slightly, just at the edges, but I saw it." "That's completely different." "Is it? She was 47 years old with no cardiac history, and she died of a heart attack. And I've been drinking chamomile tea every morning that you prepared, and I had it tested, and it had digoxin in it. So I'd like you to explain all of that to me, please." He stood up. He was not a violent man by nature. I could see that he was a planner, not a hothead, but he stood up and the chair scraped back, and his hands were flat on the table, and he looked at me the way men look at problems they are deciding how to manage. "You don't know what you're talking about," he said. His voice was very controlled. "Then tell me what I'm talking about," I said. "Tell me what was in the tea." And then something broke open in him. I have seen it happen before, in 37 years of nursing, the moment when a person has been holding something sealed inside themselves for so long that the pressure becomes greater than the container. He looked at the mug and he looked at me and he said, "It was never supposed to take this long." I kept my voice steady. "What wasn't?" "You're not supposed to be this difficult," he said, and he said it with a kind of exhausted resentment, as if I had been thoughtlessly inconvenient. Lily wasn't. It was quiet. It was peaceful. She didn't suffer. My hands were ice cold under the table and I pressed them flat against my thighs so they wouldn't shake. "You killed my daughter," I said. "Your daughter," he said, "was going to leave me." She found out about Gretchen. She was going to take Sophie. She was going to take half of everything. She was going to go back to her career and leave me behind. I had nothing without her income. Nothing. And the policy, he stopped. "The policy made it make sense," I said. "Gretchen and I were going to finally have a real life," he said. "And then you moved in and you just kept being here and the new policy." He stopped himself again, but the arithmetic was clear and I had the audio and he knew it. He lunged for my phone. He was faster than I expected. He got his hand around my wrist and I pulled back and the chair tipped and I went down with it, hitting the kitchen floor hard on my hip, and the phone skittered under the table. He went for it and I grabbed his ankle the way I had once grabbed a patient who had pulled out his IV line and was trying to walk out of the hospital, with both hands and all my weight, and I screamed for Sophie. I do not know what I was thinking. Sophie was 7 years old and asleep upstairs, but her name came out of me like a reflex, the way a person grabs for anything when they are falling. What happened was this. My son had landed early. His connecting flight had made up time and he had taken a cab from the airport instead of waiting for me to pick him up, because he was worried, because he had told me he would be there at noon and it was 8:30 inches the morning, and he had decided 9 hours was too long to wait. He had a key. He had let himself in the front door and was standing in the entryway when I screamed. He came into the kitchen and he found his mother on the floor with her phone under the table and his sister's husband crouching 3 feet away from her. My son played college football. He is 59 years old now and built like he still could. Brandon did not try to run. The police arrived at 8:52 inches the morning. Sophie was still asleep. My son had gone up to sit outside her door while I let the officers in, and she did not see any of what happened in that kitchen, and I am grateful for that every single day. They took the recording first. They listened to it twice in the kitchen, and then a third time at the station. They took the mug as evidence. They contacted my toxicologist colleague in Scottsdale and took the samples I had saved. Within 4 days, they had a warrant to exhume Lily's body. The toxicology report on Lily came back 6 weeks later. Digoxin, consistent with repeated low-level administration over an extended period, producing a gradual cardiac stress that had presented and been recorded as natural heart failure. My daughter had not died of a heart attack. She had been poisoned, methodically, over 8 or 9 months, by the man who made her tea every morning. I could not breathe when the detective told me. I sat in the same kitchen where I had faced Brandon down, and I could not breathe, and my son sat beside me with his hand on my back until I could. Gretchen, when contacted by investigators, hired her own attorney within 48 hours. The messages between her and Brandon showed clear advance knowledge of the plan. She had not been a passive bystander. She had encouraged it, had helped research untraceable cardiac compounds, had pressured Brandon when he lost his nerve. She cooperated eventually, the way people cooperate when they realize cooperation is their only remaining card. The trial lasted 11 days. I testified for 4 hours. I told the court about the dreams. I know how that sounds. I knew how it sounded in that courtroom, too. The defense attorney's expression when I described Carol sitting on the edge of my bed. But the physical evidence was overwhelming, and the jury didn't need to believe in my dead sister to convict the man who had poisoned my daughter. They just needed to listen to a recording of him saying it was never supposed to take this long and she didn't suffer. They listened. They convicted. Brandon was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole for Lily's murder. He received an additional 30 years for the conspiracy and attempt against me. He is 38 years old. He will die in that prison, and he knows it. Gretchen received 22 years. She'll be in her 60s when she is released, if she lives that long. Sophie was 7 when all of this happened. She is 9 now, and she lives with me in a house I bought in the same school district so she didn't have to change schools. A smaller house, a house that was never a crime scene, a house where no one makes her any tea. She is in therapy with a woman she calls Doctor Pam, who has helped her understand that what her father did is not a weight she is required to carry. Some days she is a child. She plays and laughs and leaves shoes in the middle of the floor and argues about screen time. And on those days, I feel something close to ordinary, close to what I remember of life before grief arrived and set up permanent residence. Other days, she is quiet in the way that children are quiet when they are processing something too large for them. And on those days, I sit near her without speaking and let her know I am not going anywhere. My son calls every evening. We talk for 20 minutes or an hour. We have talked more in the past 2 years than we did in the decade before, which is one of the strange gifts that catastrophe sometimes leaves behind when it is done with you. I am 64 years old. I retired from nursing a long time ago, and I thought I understood how bodies fail. I thought I understood loss. I did not understand what it would feel like to lose a daughter, and I did not understand what it would feel like to discover that her loss was not the accident I had grieved, but a deliberate theft that someone had taken her from Sophie, from my son, from me, on a calculated schedule designed to benefit his bank account. Some days that knowledge is a clean, sharp thing, manageable. Some days it is not. But Carol warned me. Whatever you believe about what happens after we die, whatever framework you use to understand the mechanics of love across whatever boundary separates the living from the dead, my sister came back to me 3 times and told me not to drink the tea. She pushed the mug away from me in a dream, and I listened. And I am alive to write this, to raise my granddaughter, to call my son every evening, to sit in the kitchen of a house that belongs to no one but us. I lit a candle for Carol on her birthday last month. Sophie sat across from me at the kitchen table and asked me who it was for, and I told her it was for my sister, who had died before Sophie was born, who had been my best friend, who had been funny and stubborn and occasionally infuriating and completely irreplaceable. Sophie asked if I missed her. I said I missed her every day. Sophie said, I miss my mom every day too. I said, I know, sweetheart. Me too. We sat with the candle between us until it burned down. If I could give you anything from what I have been through, and I do not mean this as a lesson, because I am not in the business of extracting tidy lessons from the worst things that have happened to me, it would be this. Do not dismiss the voice that says something is wrong. Not the anxious voice, not the fearful voice, but the deeper one, the one that speaks in the register of certainty, the one that sounds like someone who loved you. It doesn't matter whether that voice comes from your own accumulated instinct or from something outside yourself that you can't explain. It doesn't matter if you're a retired nurse who believes in lab results and not in ghosts. What matters is that the voice was right and you were careful enough to listen. My sister told me not to drink the tea. I didn't. And every morning now I make my own tea, chamomile with honey, the same as always, and I bring it to the kitchen table and I sit with Sophie while she eats her breakfast, and the light comes through the window and she argues with me about whether toast counts as a real breakfast. And I think about Carol, and I thank her, and then I drink my tea while it's still warm.